Well, that hurt. That hurt a little bit. Just to get that close, to feel that it was within your reach. The equalising goal from Cole Palmer in the last 10, 15 minutes, or whatever it was, and then to get it so cruelly snatched away from you in the last few minutes, it's tough, man. Being an England fan, it really is a struggle. I mean, on one hand, you can argue we were lucky to get to a final because the performances weren't exactly amazing. But when you look back and you think two finals and two tournaments, and we've come away with nothing, it hurts, and it really hurts. And I'm going to try my best to be as impartial and give Spain the credit they deserve, because I know with England fans we naturally just move to the Gareth Southgate criticism. We just move to talk about how crap this England team is. But ultimately, no one can disagree with the fact that the right team won this tournament. And full credit to Spain from game one to game end. They were amazing. Fully deserved to beat every team they played against, won comfortably in a lot of those games, and they had a tough run, a really tough run of fixtures. So many big teams, big nations that they came across and beat. And it was only right that they've come home with the trophy this tournament. So full credit to them. There's a lot of things that England did well, to be fair, and quite well in the sense of that could be construed as a negative, because England's game plan was so focused on trying to prevent Spain from playing their game and trying to compete with them and stop them from playing, that it became more of an identity on that front than as opposed to how England were going to go and win the game. It was just how were they going to stop Spain from winning it, which worked in some cases, but then when Spain adapted and they changed their formation and they changed their tactics, England couldn't match that adaptation, and as a result, it was all based on off-the-cuff moments from individual players for them to win the game themselves. But without needlessly previewing it, I'm going to go on to the attacking phase. So England's game plan from a defensive point of view was all about stopping Rodri from getting on the ball. They weren't pressing necessarily, they weren't being the aggressors. They were happy for Spain to have possession as long as Rodri wasn't getting it in this deeper area. In comes Phil Foden, who performed a man-marking job and who did a really good job. Didn't really give Rodri any minute to dictate the tempo and get control of the game like we know he can, and we've seen him do for Manchester City over the years. And I believe it was intentional that it was chosen as Phil Foden to perform that role. I mean, obviously it was intentional, but this is a player that plays with them every week and has done for a number of years, so he'll have known his nuances and his subtleties of how he plays the game. What a certain position may mean, what a certain just little body movement, a little look of the eye, how he looks to receive and where he looks to play the ball going forward once he receives at a certain angle. He'll have known that, he'll have seen that day in, day out. So he could have matched that and not fallen for it the way that maybe another player, maybe Bellingham or maybe Mainu could have, having not worked with him day in, day out like Foden has. And to be fair, you can't fault him, he did a really good job. But as ever, Spain have multiple ways of playing out, and England wouldn't press high; they would press only in these areas. So you'd get Bellingham and Saka sort of in between Cucurella and Carvajal and the centre backs. Kane would just sort of again mark his own lead, maybe go to press the centre back on the ball if he felt like there was an opening. But England were more than fine to let Spain have the ball in this position. Rice would mark Ulmo, you get Mainu on Fabian, and if Bellingham went to press Lenormand and there was a clear opening for Carvajal, you'd see Shaw come up to try and press Carvajal. So they planned well and they adapted well to how Spain were moving the ball. Spain didn't really get any chances to pull this England team apart in these areas. They weren't really hitting them on transition either, because this England team drop off well. They weren't really given the time on the ball to play long and play forward like that. Fabian wasn't dropping in as deep as he normally does in that first half to receive the ball alongside Rodri, so Mainu was able to stay a lot deeper with Rice in front of that defensive line. So when Spain would build up, it would be slower, and the few times they did beat the England press, it meant England were in a good position to drop off and retain their shape. And where they did get their shape, Spain, was in their little rotations. So Williams, for example, coming inside to drag Walker inside, that would maybe allow Cucurella to bomb forward into this area, that could drag Saka back, created space in this left channel. That if they could find the ball into Laporte, he could drive the ball forward. And once there was the threat of that team being exposed in behind, they'd quickly drop into their five back. So as much as Saka could get pulled into his right wing back position, he can come in alongside. If Cucurella was in a deeper position, he was alongside Rodri, but he'd be more than willing to cover that area to make sure that Kyle Walker wasn't exposed. Carvajal would sit a lot deeper on the opposite side, so it meant that Bellingham didn't have as much defensive responsibility, and Spain didn't generally look to attack down that side. Good tactically from Southgate, you have to say, because that was a clear threat from Spain throughout the tournament. They did well with it. Cucurella and Williams, quality of play, and their link up caused teams problems, but Saka covered in. Where it was actually more of an issue was when Saka didn't cover it and Cucurella was a bit higher up, was Williams would maintain width on this side and Carl Walker would get pulled in far too narrow. He'd be too keen to cover John Stones in this position. And as the ball would come over to Williams, he'd have a lot of time and Carl Walker just doesn't have that spring in his step from a defensive point of view to go and close the player on the ball down quickly. So they did get a number of chances from that area. Williams' delivery from that side was a bit wayward and he couldn't connect with a lot of his crosses, but he was given a lot of time to do so. So that was one way that Spain would try to attack. Another is, again, through the rotations that we've seen throughout the tournament with their positional play. Morata dropping into this area here to receive the ball and get on the turn and create. But I will say, I think Mainu and Rice did a really good job of jumping from their marker to the player that was deemed a threat at that time to quickly engage with them and prevent that from becoming an issue. So let's just say if the ball went into Morata from that position, Rice would quickly come across. Morata wouldn't really have a place to go because Mainu would be quickly covered around, so he'd have to maybe play the ball back to Carvajal if he was showing for it, or risk losing it himself. And as I say, Rice and Mainu really covered those areas well. It allowed also Stones and Gahey to perform more traditional centre back roles. They weren't necessarily marking as much because Morata likes to drop in and play a bit of a false nine role, so they were able to maintain a bit of an extra layer of protection for England to prevent any space from really being exposed in that box. Also, another change that we see a lot is Rodri dropping into the defensive line that would allow either Laporte or Lenormand, but most likely Laporte to drive forward with the ball. Kane would do a really good job of dropping into space to prevent anything from becoming exposed. And Laporte didn't really have any space to drive into because of the numbers that England had back. So let's just say if I push Saka back into this area, Kane could drop in, Mainu could cover across, and they wouldn't allow themselves to be exposed. And that was a bit too rigid. It was a bit too predictable from Spain. They weren't as fluid with their movements as they have been in previous games. I thought Fabian and Olmo in that first half really struggled to find space and get on the ball. A lot of that was down to England's shape. Also, we've seen them perform better under tight circumstances previously, and whether it was just the occasion, they really struggled. And England defensively in that first half, you can't knock them. They defended really well, protected the box, kept it compact, kept it tight. Spain had no real space to play into. In the second half, though, Spain made a change, and it all changed. So the change was that Zubamendi came on for Rodri, who was deemed to have had an injury in the first half, so had to go off at half time. And because Phil Foden's marking role was centred completely around Rodri, I'm not sure if this substitution maybe gave him a newfound bit of freedom to go and press. But as a result, you'd see him jumping from Zubamendi a lot to go and press Lenormand and turn it into more of a traditional 4-4-2, which left Rice a lot more exposed as Mainu was pushing up into Fabian, who dropped a lot deeper, which created a lot more space in between the line as it was Phil Foden alongside Harry Kane and Kobbie Mainu in these more advanced areas trying to press a lot higher. Also, another change that Spain made when this happened was Bellingham wasn't really tracking his marker as much. Saka would do a really good job on Cucurella, and as a result, that left-hand side for Spain wasn't as effective with their link-up. Bellingham was getting caught up the pitch a lot. So as a result, I think De La Fuente noticed that Carvajal was going to get more space on that right-hand side than Cucurella was. And he just allowed him to drift in. He'd invert into this area here alongside Olmo to create almost a lopsided 3-2-5 shape. That if they beat that initial press of England, which they did quite a lot, there was space to play the ball into on this right-hand side. Yamal could invert as well and Carvajal could play the wide player. Either way, but they had that extra man that was exploiting an England weakness within their press. And so Spain would look to build up on the right hand side, where first half they were looking to build up on the left, which meant that Rice had to cover across, and England's defence would have to cover across into this area here. And this is what also caused that first goal. As with the ball coming in here, let's say Yamal coming in deeper and Carvajal, Rice coming across, Walker got conned by the movement of Olmo, who was now sitting a lot freer in this area as a result, and was able to exploit that space that Kyle Walker had left between himself and John Stones, which meant that when the pass went over into Nico Williams on this side, he was unmarked. Saka hadn't tracked him because Saka's job wasn't to track him, and he exploited Kyle Walker in that area there. And Kyle Walker really did have a bit of a poor game in terms of the movements that was around him. He was left exploited, and it ultimately comes down to England losing that midfield battle. With Jude Bellingham not doing his defensive work, the change of shape allowing Mainu and Foden to get pushed further up the field and exploiting where the danger was for England. And they did try and combat that, England. So in the second half, there were substitutions that were made. Mainu went off, Palmer came on, and that change also allowed Bellingham to sit inside to mark Zubamendi in the middle, and Phil Foden was tasked with tracking Carvajal as a result that to prevent England from really getting opened up. And he did a good job of it. It was a lot better than Bellingham. Bellingham was as less a defensive issue in the centre. So they were able to stop it getting opened up in the central areas, but that meant there was more space out wide. And Kyle Walker got pulled too wide to the player on the ball, Cucurella, who was able to cross it in to Oyarzabal, and Spain scored their second goal and won the game. But the level of tactical quality within the Spanish side far outweighs than what we have with England. And De La Fuente used that to his advantage perfectly. And as a result, they brought home the trophy from that sense. But how did it go on the other side of it? Well, it's a bit of an issue. So England's main threat was entirely transitional, which was an issue, and it's been an issue all tournament, that they can't break out of this defensive shape into their attacking shape with enough quality. Their only transitional threat, really, is Bukayo Saka, who couldn't break out because of how deep he was pushed in his defensive state. As much as you can see the quality of his right wing back positioning from a defensive point of view, it really was detrimental to England from an attack. As I said, he couldn't get up the field quick enough, which as a result means that when England would look to break out and attack, it would have to be on the left-hand side to give Saka more time to get upfield and attack that right flank. But an issue is, on that left-hand side, they had players in Foden, in Kane, in Bellingham, who would all look to receive the ball. And as much as they had numerical advantages when Spain got pushed back over to this side, they couldn't really hurt them, as I'll just demonstrate. So Spain, like England did, went to set up with a midfield man marking structure. Olmo would get pushed onto Rice, Fabian on Mainu, and Rodri onto Phil Foden. Bellingham, coming in from the left-hand side, provided that extra man, and Kane would also do a really good job of outnumbering that Spain marking system. But again, because of the lack of transitional threat on that side, Spain could squeeze over onto this side of the pitch. They didn't really have to worry about anything going in behind. So, as much as they were outnumbered, they had the freedom of giving England very little space to play in. And they would get the occasional overlap from Luke Shaw in this area, as Lamine Yamal would switch off a few times, which allowed him to become the extra man, which meant Carvajal had to switch and cover him. But again, Carvajal could do it on that side because he didn't have a threat to mark naturally from the wide areas of a winger, of an Anthony Gordon, of a whoever. So, yeah, Jude Bellingham could have the ball in this position, but couldn't really hurt him. And it allowed Spain to squeeze over. And the few times they did get joy was by getting the ball to either himself or to Foden or to Harry Kane. So they could then switch the ball over to Bukayo Saka on this side. Cucurella could come across. Kyle Walker would also overlap on this side. The issue is because of how much Spain were allowed to defend in their unit and defend a little bit deeper because of the way England played and their lack of real quality, Spain were already in a good enough position where all they had to do was just shift across and the threat would be dealt with. Nico Williams did a fantastic job of Kyle Walker on this side as well, so that Saka couldn't really use him as an option, so he was forced to have to come back inside, where he'd then run into the likes of Fabian, to the likes of Rodri, who got back into shape quick enough for reasons I was saying before, and they couldn't really hurt him that way. Where it did get better in the second half was when they made substitutions. So if I just bring Kobe Mainoo off for Cole Palmer was entrusted to do the exact same job on that right hand side, with Jude Bellingham playing a lot more central, coming over to the right. But he was able to use the transitional threat of Bukayo Saka in this position. So where Spain could leave England with a lot more space on the left hand side without any real fear of it hurting them, Cole Palmer had that. He now had the run of Saka on this side, and Kyle Walker wasn't overlapping as much to allow Saka to remain one-on-one with Cucurella. And that's where their equalising goal came from. Kyle Palmer slipping it down to Saka and creating the chance from there. The ball into the box, the late run of Jude Bellingham, the 10 on that side into the box, laying it off Cole Palmer, who put it into the bottom corner. But that left side, that lack of transitional threat, the Trippier left back experiment did not work at all. And as a result, it made him easy to play against. And regardless of that, I still thought the performances of Bellingham, Kane, and Foden were really poor. They just have such little chemistry playing together, it's not even true. And I will say, Declan Rice, again, I don't want to say it again because I've said it too many times already this tournament, but when he wins the ball back and there's an opportunity to counter-attack and hit Spain when they're at the most vulnerable, hit them quickly, he takes too many touches, he's afraid to give it into players who are marked, who have players around him, and he takes the safe option. He's too quick, too easy to turn back and play it safe. And you can't play with that little amount of risk at top level football in any realm of competition. And so as a result, England's attack became basic, it became too predictable. It was only when Cole Palmer came on that they played with a bit more unpredictability and played with just a level of threat. And that is why England aren't bringing home the Euros. It was poor tactically from an attacking sense, you have to say. And it does feel like this is going to be Gareth Southgate's last tournament. Look, he's been so heavily criticised. I'm not going to join in. Is Southgate a perfect manager? No. Regardless of what you'll say about him tactically, regardless of what you'll say about every reason you want to give it to him, he's given me some of my greatest moments in England. I'll be forever grateful for him giving me a reason to love my country again, because before that, with the golden generation, with the managers that came before, Wally with the Brolly, it became hard to be an England fan. He has made it fun to be an England fan again. He's made it so that we go into tournaments and actually feel like we're going to play a part, because we have. We've gotten to 2 finals. All right, he hasn't had enough to get us quite over the line, but he's gotten us further than anyone else has before in our lifetime. And so I will always love and respect him for that. And I want to thank him. If this is his last tournament, he's given me great memories. But unfortunately, he just didn't have enough to get over the line against a team like Spain, who were deserved winners on the night. Tactically, they're just a step ahead. And hopefully, I've explained that with this video. But thank you guys for watching. And I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching my content throughout Euro 2024 as well. It's been a blast. On to next season, on to the summer. There's still content to come. Cheers, lads. In a bit.